Welcome back to the third episode of our four-part video series, Admission Essentials by Sesameed Education. In this third episode, we'll be covering what a good personal statement should reflect about the applicant. I'm your host, Daniel Cito. I'm an education consultant, founder and head of Sesameed Education. For those viewers who have come to know Mr. Marshall for the first time, let me give a quick introduction. Leo has served the independent school world for 40 years, at day schools, at boarding schools, as a teacher, athletic coach, director of college guidance, director of admissions, director of advancement, deputy headmaster, president and CEO. Leo is now retired, and his last position was the director of admissions and financial aid at the Webb Schools in the United States. Welcome back, Leo. We're so glad to have you back.
Hi, Daniel. Nice to be back. Nice to see you.
Now, today in this third episode, we'll be doing a deep dive into personal statements, the role of personal statements in a student's boarding school application. So, first of all, would you like to share with our audience as to what is the purpose behind personal statements, behind student writing about these essays?
Many schools require them and some do not. So we want to be clear about that right now, that some schools don't have what they call an personal essay, personal statement, but those who do, it's just a chance for the student to talk about themselves, to express who they are. Sometimes these statements have a specific question to ask, like, tell us about a time in your life when you had a challenge, or tell us about your favorite time outside of school. What do you like to do? And others say, just tell us about yourself. It really depends on the school, so that we have to understand there's really no common link to each school. But if they do ask for a statement, they just want to hear the student thinking on paper, expressing themselves on paper. They don't have a specific format. They will tell you not to make it very long. You don't want to make it long at all. But other than that, they'll say within 500 words or 1,000 words, tell us a little bit about yourself, or they'll give a specific question that to be answered, as I said, could be, what's your greatest challenge in life? What makes you happiest? Whatever. It really depends on the school. And they are read. The schools, they are read. So, and I want to distinguish this. We'll talk later, the essay that's required on an SSAT or ISEE. They have their own on-site essays, which are proctored. That's a very different situation. We should talk about that later. But the personal statement is basically to get to know the student, a little more time to have the student talk about themselves.
Now, every school has their own admission process, and they have their own system, and that's being shown clearly on the website. And every school's essay questions are slightly different from one another. And can you describe as a whole the type of questions being posed by the boarding schools? I mean, what type of categories are they? I mean, some about, asking like from an interesting book that you have read, all the way to, as you said, something a little more introspective about, a personal experience, a life-changing experience, whatnot. So how would you describe the major categories of personal statements being requested upon applicants?
Yeah, I really don't think there are. I don't think there are major categories. It's up to the school. And let's be clear, more and more schools now are using the application like Gateway to Prep standard application online, which is Enrollment Management Association. Many schools are using those applications, which are common applications in the general term, and they have our own essay on there, which could tell us a little bit more about yourself. So that's the schools can choose and put their own essay on there, their own statement request, or just use the common one. So be sure there's that. There really aren't any categories I can think of. It's just all over the place. It's one school's to another. I saw an essay once where they talked about a famous American book called Huckleberry Finn, and they said, tell us about the metaphor of the river going, that Huckleberry Finn and Joe go down the river. What's the metaphor for the river? And tell us about that. That's a little advanced, but they're all over the place. So there's really no category. There's no common thinking about essays. I would say the most common is, here's a chance to tell us a little bit about yourself in 500 words.
Now, you just mentioned that there is a common platform, right? Like SAO, which is one of the platforms. Through these platforms, a student or a family can apply to multiple boarding schools, and therefore you don't have to write separately to the essay questions being posed by every single school. Instead, they just write towards a common set of essay questions. Can we learn a little bit about the strategy behind as to, is it better for families to apply to 5 different boarding schools and, using their 5 different systems, or is it because it appears to be more convenient to just use one SAO or common application? So can you shed a little bit of light as to the decision process that parents should think about, whether they should choose to do the application process individually, school by school, or versus they should use a common platform?
The schools will accept the SAO, we call it the SA, Standard Application Online, or Gateway to Prep. There's 60 some schools with Gateway to Prep, or both. It doesn't matter to them. It doesn't matter. And if they have their own application, it really doesn't matter. There is no advantage, to the school, no preference by the school. If a student, in fact, wants to apply to 5 or 6 schools, probably is a good idea to use one of the Standard Application Online, Gateway to Prep. They're 2 different applications. But if the schools accept those, that doesn't mean they have a preference. That just whatever the student wants to use. They're not going to say, but we prefer you to use our application. There may be a couple of schools that do that, but I don't know of any that do that anymore. So the advantage to the family is, if you want to apply to more than one school, you may want to use one of those common platforms. But it absolutely does not hurt their chances if they do the common platform as opposed to the school's own application. There's not going to be any preference whatsoever. So I would say to parents, don't worry, do the one that feels best for you.
Got it. And Leo, can you also shed some light as to the essays being posed by third-party occasions, such as while students is taking the SSAT test, they would also be required to write a paragraph or a few paragraphs, right? So can you shed a little light about the role of those type of essays? Right.
In my final years, my particular school, we prefer those because we know those are in person. We know they're being proctored. There is a supervisor there. They're timed. And so we know who's writing the essay. We don't know who's writing the essay if it's through the application. Not saying don't do that. It's just that we don't really know who's writing the essay. Most of the time it is the student. We can tell. We actually can tell if the student's not writing the essay. But the advantage of the ISEE, Independent School Entrance Exam, SSAT, is that we know that it is administered, it is proctored, it is timed, and they do have specific questions. And by the way, those questions change all the time. So I can't tell you what those questions would be this year. So by all means, those are read. If we require the SSAT, those essays are read. And by the way, here's something parents need to understand. We'll read the SSAT essay or ISEE essay, and we can compare it to the one on their application. If they're dramatically different in terms of sophistication, then we ask questions. But the SSAT, it's their chance by themselves, proctored, to be writing an essay with a specific question and answering the question. How do they answer the question? How do they approach the subject? How do they form their writing? What is their syntax like? So and I'm not saying this is for everybody, but my preference in my last years was the applications in standardized testing, the essays in standardized testing. But that's just me. I can't speak for the other schools.
Those essays being read, regardless of whether it's from SSAT or from the school's own essay questions, would the admission office spend more time looking into the proficiency of the English language, such as grammar, syntax, how you actually write from an English point of view, like an English class kind of angle? Or would you be looking at more as to the content of being written, of what is being written, meaning, what to learn more about the student and the applicant. So from what angle will the school be reading those essays?
Both. But the first thing is you can skim the application. You can read the application very quickly. If you see that it's poor grammar, poor spelling. Well, let's talk about the personal statement of the application. If there's poor spelling and there's poor grammar, that's not good. That means obviously you're not editing, you're not checking your writing. And if you're not strong in English and you do the SSAT essay or ISE essay, we scan those right away and see what the English is like. And then let's take the SSAT, and you talk about content. If it says, to answer the question, and the student answers the question in 2 or 3 sentences, which I've seen, that's not good. They have to answer the question or approach the subject from the point of view of the subject, and they should be answering the subject, answering the question, not coming up with their own. I mean, for example, I've seen some students where the question may be something like, talk about a challenge in your life. I don't want to belabor that. And the student says, my greatest challenge in life is, and then goes completely off tangent, as we say, goes into a completely different world altogether, trying to impress the application. My greatest challenge in life, we've seen this, is getting into your school because it's the best school, and that's not answering the question. We've seen that. So we want to be careful when we write these essays. Don't think you're writing to impress us, to select you. The essay on the application is about who you are, is best way to or answer the question. The SSAT essay is answer the question in a reasonable amount of time. You've got 20 minutes, 25? It's been a while. So, take that time to kind of put your thoughts on paper and then write it down. But going back to your question, first thing we look for is grammar. Second, grammar, syntax, punctuation appropriate. The second thing we look at is have they answered the question in a reasonable amount of time. You only have so much time in the SSAT. That's what we like about it. What you don't want to do on the personal statement when you go into content is write too long. Keep writing and writing and writing, because we're probably not going to read all that. We just don't have time. I don't care what any school tells you. They don't have time to read 3-page essay. So brief, 1 page, 500 words, and that's probably as most as that's going to be read. So this has to decide. So grammar first, written English, appropriate written English, and then content, answering the question. Very important.
Because those essays are handwritten, how relevant or how important is the quality of the handwriting?
That's a great question. We understand these are still adolescents. Their handwriting may not be perfect. We just want to be able to read it. So that's my answer. We just have to we're not going to grade the handwriting, but we have to read it. We have to, have to be able to understand. So if we can't read it because the penmanship is so bad, that's a problem. But we don't grade penmanship. We don't grade the writing skill.
How would you react or respond to those essays where you feel that maybe it has extensive of adult involvement? Maybe the parent might brush it up quite a lot, and all that. How would you therefore penalize or throw a negative view of the overall application because of that? I mean, because many parents may have that temptation of wanting to help the child brush up and edit in a better way.
Well, first of all, they should have someone look at the essay. If they're writing the application, someone should be able to look at it to make sure the writing, the spelling is correct. That's okay. If we start to read an essay that clearly is too sophisticated for a 13, 14-year-old, we don't penalize them. We just ignore it. What you're trying to do in the application, the general thought about applications is everything it's the whole, it's the scores, it's the grades, it's the application, it's the interview. They all come together, and each one has its own pieces involved. The test scores have the writing sample. The application has a writing statement. The application also has questions to answer. What's your favorite subject? Where did you go to school? What's your country you most visited, and things like that. They're all equally important. But if we have to eliminate, for example, an essay that clearly isn't being written by the child, which we could figure out, then that's just one less thing we're looking at. That's one less thing to your advantage there. And then, we've talked before this interview a little bit about chat, which is new to older people like me. If we get a sense that this is not written by the student, it could work against them. But more important is it just eliminated. It's just, we're not going to read this. We're just going to do something else, look at something else. So, but we don't penalize them in the pure sense of the word. We just ignore it.
Can you share from your years of recollection of coming across so many different essays, over the years? What are some of the good examples that you can recall that you would like to, share those with the viewers, as well as some counter examples of what to avoid, so that our viewers, the parents, they can get a better sense as to how they can guide their child in this aspect?
It's hard to say. It really is hard to say. I mean, the ones that just sparkle, you could just tell on paper. You can hear the personality of the student, read that, you can just sense the personality, just the way the child writes. It's just so hard for me. I can't pinpoint exactly what it is unless, I was once in English and history. I was once an advanced placement teacher, so I know how to read these things. From one which is just great writing and just the sparkling personality coming out, as opposed to very rote thing. I guess the best way, the ones that don't work, is clearly they're trying to write for us. You understand that? They're trying to write for us as opposed to writing for themselves. What does this school want from me? Well, we just want you to answer the question. We're not saying, So again, I think I alluded to this earlier. When you see an essay that goes on and the subject is, what's your favorite trip overseas? And they talk about, I've just traveled to Egypt to see the pyramids, which it brings me back to my joy of thinking of coming to your school someday. I've seen that so often. And then they get off the subject, totally get off the subject in order to try and impress us. That doesn't work at all. What doesn't work at all, I said earlier, is even on the SSAT, ISEE, is they only do 2 or 3 sentences. That's it. So 2 things happen, and this is something, if we could ever talk about real test prep. When you get they call it a prompt, the SSAT prompt. Here's the question. Here's the topic to write about. You can have on a piece of paper, you're allowed to write notes. But some students take too long writing the notes, and then they find out they run out of time. They can't get it on paper. So you've got to get your thoughts put together quickly and get right on paper. You can't spend a lot of time. We don't know what's going on. All we see is 2 sentences, which I've seen. And that's not good. That's not good at all. When you just only have 2 sentences, either you took too much time putting your thoughts together, or you didn't think this essay was very important. There's so many. We've seen thousands of them. And our school eventually stopped using the application essay. As I said, we were using the SSAT. We just didn't find a lot of the essays that helpful, but other schools would very much find them important. So I can't go to one essay that I can remember. In some cases, schools will have a faculty member read the essays, maybe the department chair of English. And we did that for a while at one of my schools. And that was wonderful. That's all that person did on the committee. She read the essays, and then when the candidate's name came up for our final discussion, we would point to her. In this case, it was a wonderful woman who ran our English department, and she said, "This is what I see in this writing." So we do that, and other schools may do that. So we have someone specifically reading the essays, and then part of the discussion, she weighs in on what she thought of the essay. So I want to emphasize that if they ask for an essay, they're going to be read by who? It could be the admission officer, it could be a faculty member, but they are going to be read if they're asked for it. The SSAT essays are read, so that's important to know. But I guess going back to it, I'm repeating myself, is answer the question or address the topic in a reasonable amount of time, not too much and not too little. If you're not on topic, that's a problem.
If there's one thing that you would like our viewers today to take away from this session, what would that be?
I think throughout our interviews, it's important to know that there's so many pieces, as I just said, I'm repeating myself, there's so many pieces to the application that we look at that all are equally important. Okay, I would say grades are a little more important than everything if we understand what the grades mean. But everything has equal importance, otherwise we wouldn't ask for it. So, on the application, there'll be a section, tell us about your activities. There'll be a section that'll probably say, and, what is your favorite place to visit? Where would you like to visit someday? What's your favorite thing to do when you're at home by yourself? These are just like quick, 1 or 2 word answers. We read those, and those help us, by the way, in the interview if we have the application. That just tells us a little bit more about the candidate. And then we would read the statement if it's required. And then we look at the test scores. And then in another interview with you and I, will talk about where the interview comes in, which is equally important and sometimes very important, by the way. So I would just say, remember that everything is equal. Parents should not say, I need to work more on this than on this. Families, regardless of where they're from, can think they can get inside our head and saying, this is what they want. We want you just to do the process. Give us your best piece of work. Give us the best, give us a best understanding of who you are. We're trying to find out who this candidate is. Is this a candidate who can do the work at our school, live in a community of students, dormitories, do activities, be excited about learning, love to be in the classroom, love to be around us, get along with each other. That's what we're trying to find out. It's not always easy because they all start to look the same. But eventually you can see which students kind of stand out over others. And I can't tell parents what that looks like because it changes from year to year.
Once again, thank you so much, Leo, for joining us today for this 3rd episode. And we cannot wait to see you again in the next one.
Oh, my pleasure, as always. Hopefully this is helpful.
To all viewers out there, if you would like to keep learning more about admission tips and tricks from Mr. Leo Marshall, please stay tuned to our 4th and final episode of our Admission Essentials series, where we'll be exploring the role of interviews in the boarding school application process. And if you like what we have shared today, please remember to like, share, and subscribe to Sesameed Education. Thank you all for watching, and we'll catch you on our next and final episode of our Admissions Essentials series. Bye-bye.